Before we get into today's video, we want to talk about our amazing sponsor, The Ridge. The Ridge makes the best wallets. Not only are they sleek and look cool, but they are durable and safe. They are so durable that they come with a lifetime warranty, so this could be the last wallet you buy. They also keep your cards protected because they are equipped with RFID blocking. Ridge wallets make a fantastic Father's Day gift. They have dozens of designs in 3 different materials, so you're bound to find something your dad will love. Ridge wallets are also incredibly practical. A Ridge wallet holds 12 cards plus your money, so there's no room to carry junk. Right now, the Ridge is offering criminally listed viewers 10% off with free worldwide shipping and returns. Just go to ridge.com/listed, that's ridge.com/listed, and use the promo code listed at the checkout. Buy your dad the last wallet he'll ever need and help support Criminally Listed by checking out ridge.com/listed. Number 3. Little Lord Fauntleroy. Waukesha County is in southeast Wisconsin. Years went by and the police couldn't confirm the identities of the females. He was working in a quarry just outside of the town of Waukesha. He had found the dead body of a young boy floating in a pond. The sheriff's department retrieved the body from the water. It's believed that the boy was about 5 or 6 years old. He had blonde curly hair and light blue eyes. The sheriff's department noted that he was well dressed and he possibly came from a well-to-do family. The sheriff's department had no way to identify the boy. No one in the area had reported a child missing. Because of the way he was dressed, he was nicknamed Little Lord Fauntleroy. Little Lord Fauntleroy was an immensely popular book by Francis Hodgson Burnett that was published in 1886. In the book, the protagonist, a young American boy named Cedric Errol, learns that he's the heir to an earldom in England. In England, he gets the title Little Lord Fauntleroy. The character's style of dress had a tremendous influence on the way young American boys dressed for decades. The medical examiner did not know how long the body had been in the water. It may have been in the water for a few days or even a few months. Another worker with the quarry approached the sheriff and told him about an odd incident that happened on February 6, about a month before the body was found. A woman who was crying approached him and asked if he had seen a boy in the area. The worker had not seen a boy and he told her so. The woman was then joined by a man who kept looking in the quarry. The couple chatted for a few minutes and then got into a car that was parked nearby and drove away. From the worker's account, the sheriff's department developed a theory. The man, the woman, and the deceased boy came to the area together. The couple wanted to have sex, so they had the boy take a walk. Then, he accidentally fell into the water and drowned. But then, the medical examiner cast some serious doubt on that theory. The young boy hadn't drowned. In fact, he had very little water in his lungs. The medical examiner discovered he had been beaten in the head with a blunt object, and this was the cause of death. After he had been beaten to death, he was dumped in the water. Less than a week after the body was found, a man in Chicago, Illinois, said that the body was his 4-year-old nephew, James Hornage. A few weeks before the body was found, James and his sister were kidnapped by their father. He had vanished with the children. Before they went missing, the father had threatened to kill the children several times. James's mother traveled to Waukesha, but she could not make a positive ID. The owner of a department store in Waukesha got in contact with the sheriff's department. He was sure that some of the clothing that the boy was wearing came from his department store. He was sure about this because the items were not part of his store's standard stock. He had gotten the items from another department store's bankruptcy sale. His store sold the items in a sale in January, just a few months before the body was found. However, the proprietor of the department store had no idea who bought the items, and there was no way to find out who did. The police heard a rumor that the same woman who was seen crying at the quarry in February had died by suicide by drowning herself in the same quarry. So the quarry water was dragged. Also, dynamite was set off in the water to try and raise the body to the surface. But a second body was not found in the quarry. The body of Little Lord Fauntleroy was held in the morgue in Waukesha, and hundreds of people came by to see the body. But no one was able to identify him. The body was then sent to Milwaukee, Wisconsin for a second autopsy. The body was put on display there, and hundreds of people came to look at him. Once again, no one recognized the boy. He ended up being buried in the Prairie Home Cemetery in Waukesha. His headstone reads, "Unknown boy found in O'Laughlin Quarry, Waukesha, Wisconsin, March 8, 1921. For decades, there were no solid leads to the identity of the boy or who may have killed him. That all changed on June 15, 1948, nearly 27 years after the body was found. That was the last time 54-year-old Celia LeMay was seen alive. Celia was the supervisor of lunches for schools in Milwaukee County and Waukesha County. Celia was the third wife of a man named Edwin LeMay. Edmund's second wife said that Edmund was an evil man who had tried to kill her several times. Edmund's first wife had died in 1921, not long before Little Lord Fauntleroy's body was found. She had died from tuberculosis. They had one son, Homer LeMay, who was 6 years old when his mother died. It turned out that no one had seen Homer since his mother's death. Edmund was asked about Homer's whereabouts, and he said that after his wife's death, he put Homer up for adoption. Edmund said that Homer was eventually adopted by Mr. and Mrs. James Norton, who lived in Chicago, Illinois. He claimed that months after Homer was adopted, Homer traveled with the Nortons to Argentina. Edmund said that tragically, in Argentina, there was a car accident and Homer was killed. Edmund told the investigators that 2 years after the accident, the Nortons sent him a newspaper clipping about Homer's death. The police asked Edmund for the Nortons' contact information so they could verify his story. Edmund said that the Nortons were dead. The police investigated Edmund's story and they found no evidence to back it up. There were no adoption records for Homer. In 1921, there were no passports issued for a man named James Norton or a boy named Homer LeMay or Homer Norton. The police got in contact with the authorities in Argentina. They had no record of an American boy dying in a car accident there in 1921. Edmund said that the article the Norton sent him was from an English-language newspaper in Argentina. But none of the English-language newspapers had any articles in their archives about a young American boy dying in a car accident in 1921. While the police couldn't validate Edmund's story, they could not disprove it either. Nor could they prove that Little Lord Fauntleroy was his son, Homer. There was only one photograph taken of little Lord Fauntleroy's body. The police compared it to a photograph of Homer. They thought that the similarities were striking, but the police still did not think that there was enough evidence to charge Edmund LeMay with anything. They also didn't think that there was enough evidence to prove that the body was Homer LeMay. The police decided to search the quarry for the remains of Edmund's third wife, Celia, but the police found nothing of interest. In the end, it was never conclusively proved that Edmund killed his third wife. Edmund only ended up being charged with one crime, forgery. He had been accused of forging his third wife's signature on a check. He was ultimately found not guilty. Edmund's third wife, Celia LeMay, has never been found. It's unclear what happened to Edmund LeMay after he was tried for forgery. After nearly a century, the identity of the boy known as Little Lord Fauntleroy is still a mystery. Number 2. Lost Boy Larry. On the evening of Tuesday, August 7th, 1973, Darlene Ross was using a CB radio in her home in Fontana, California. At around 6:30, she heard a transmission from what sounded like a little boy. The boy was hysterical. He was crying and pleading for help. Ross talked to the boy, and he said his father was dead. Then the signal faded. But then, a few minutes later, the signal came back, and Ross heard the boy say, "Come on, David, help me." Ross thought that the boy was trying to contact someone named David on the CB radio. Ross continued to talk to the boy. The boy said his name was Larry and he was in New Mexico. Then the signal was gone. The woman then got in contact with the police in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Then they started to get other reports from people who heard the boy crying on the CB radio. Several people in California heard the boy, and even people all the way in Mississippi said that they heard him. Later, people all the way up in Canada reported hearing the young boy's cries on the CB radio airwaves. Apparently, Larry didn't really know how to use the CB radio because he kept switching channels. Based on the reports of where he was heard, the authorities in New Mexico thought that he might be in a remote area in the southern part of the state. So they started massive searches for him just hours after receiving the initial report from Darlene Ross. But the searchers didn't even know what they were looking for. Was the young man in a cabin or at a campground? Was he involved in a small plane crash or car crash? The next day, which was a Wednesday, people continued to talk to the boy. He confirmed that his name was Larry, but he either didn't know or didn't remember his last name. He said he was 6 years old. He said he was riding in the pickup truck that his father was driving, but then there was an accident and their pickup truck ended up on its roof. Larry said his father was dead and he was trapped in the overturned truck with no food or water. Less than 24 hours after Darlene Ross first talked to Larry, the search for him was expanded. But still, no trace of Larry in the overturned pickup truck were found. As time went on, searches were conducted based on clues Larry gave about the environment. For example, at sundown, Larry said it was raining. The searchers learned that it had rained in central New Mexico at sundown. So they searched that area, but nothing of interest was found. On Thursday, August 9th, 1973, 3 days after Darlene Ross first talked to Larry, the strength of Larry's CB radio signal kept getting weaker. The searchers thought that the battery on the radio was dying. Because of the constant use, it was expected that the batteries of the CB radio would die that evening. Thursday came to an end without any trace of Larry being found. The next day, a man living in Phoenix, Arizona, got in contact with the authorities in New Mexico. He said he had talked to a boy on the CB radio who said his name was David. He said that he and his father had been in an accident. They were driving a red pickup truck with a white camper, and it ended up on its roof. David said he was outside the truck, but his father was still inside the truck and he was hurt. This communication confused everyone who was searching for Larry. Who was David? Was he with Larry? People noted that when Darlene Ross talked to Larry, he said, "Come on, David, help me." Could Larry have been talking to a David who was with him at the crash site? If that was the case, why hadn't Larry mentioned that David was with him? Also, why didn't David use the CB radio before the 4th day? Finally, how was the CB radio still functional? This all fueled speculation that the whole thing was a hoax. But committing to the idea that it was a hoax was an incredibly enormous gamble. If it wasn't a hoax, a young boy, or possibly boys, would die of starvation and dehydration. Shortly after receiving the report about David's CB radio transmissions, the authorities learned that his communications were a hoax. David was a boy in Phoenix using a walkie-talkie who did not know anything about Larry except what he read in the newspaper. On the second day of searches for Larry, several different groups of people had joined the search. This included the state police, the Albuquerque Citizens Radio Association, and the New Mexico Civil Air Patrol. Also, many amateurs had organized search teams. The problem was that there was very little oversight. So some areas were searched multiple times by several groups, while other areas were not searched at all. As the days went on, the searchers became frustrated, and the different groups started fighting with each other. This led to an even further breakdown in communication between the groups of searchers. By day 5, the search for Larry was called off. They had not heard from him for 2 days. The searchers thought that if he was trapped in a vehicle without any food or water, then he was most likely dead at that point. It was the most expensive search conducted in New Mexico. To this day, no one is sure if Larry was real or if it was just a hoax. On August 25, 1973, less than 2 weeks after the search for Larry was called off, a man came on to the CB radio airwaves and he took credit for the hoax. He mocked the authorities for falling for it. He also said he was going to kill President Richard Nixon and Vice President Spiro Agnew. However, many people did not believe the man and just thought he was deranged or seeking attention, or both. Other people think it's a hoax because a pickup truck with the remains of a man and a child have never been found in New Mexico. Also, a father and a son with the name Larry have never been reported missing. Another problem was that Larry was vague on his own personal details, like his last name, his address, and the names of other family members. Some people think it was a hoax because of how many people heard the transmissions from such long distances away. Notably, people in California, Mississippi, and Canada heard the transmissions. Could a CB radio attached to a crashed, overturned truck be powerful enough to broadcast to places that were over 1,000 miles away. The people who talked to Larry are convinced he was real. Other people point out that Larry said he was in New Mexico, but the crash could have taken place somewhere else. Unfortunately, we may never find out if Lost Boy Larry was real or just a hoax. But some good things did come out of the situation. Significant improvements were made to search and rescue procedures in New Mexico. Number 1. The Bear Brook Murders. On November 10, 1985, a hunter was in Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. He walked onto a private lot that was just outside the park. There had been a store on the lot, but it had burned down. On the lot, he found a 55-gallon steel drum that had been knocked over. Sticking out of the barrel was a human foot. The man immediately got in contact with the police. Inside the barrel was the partially dismembered bodies of 2 females. One of the females was between the ages of 22 and 32. The other body was a young girl, possibly between the ages of 5 and 11. The medical examiner determined that they had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner thought that they had been dead anywhere from 6 months to 3 years. The police believed that the 2 victims were related. They thought they were either sisters or mother and daughter. The remains were held for a year and a half in the morgue. No one came forward to claim them, so they were interred at a cemetery in Allenstown without names. Years went by, and the police couldn't confirm the identities of the females, nor did they find out who killed them. In spring 2000, 15 years after the discovery of the barrel, there was a review of the case. On May 9th, the investigators went back to the location where the barrel was found. Amazingly, they found another barrel that was 300 feet from where the first barrel was found. Inside the barrel were the remains of 2 young girls. The medical examiner thought that they had died around the same time as the females found in the first barrel. Like the first 2 victims, they had been beaten to death. It is believed that both girls were younger than the girl found in the first barrel. One girl was between the ages of 2 and 4. She had an overbite and a gap between her front teeth. She was about 3'8" and she had wavy, light brown hair. The second girl was younger, possibly between the ages of 1 and 3. The discovery of the second barrel changed the entire course of the investigation. The police had previously tried to connect the first 2 bodies to reports of pairs of missing females. They now realized that they should have been looking for reports of 4 females who went missing. The police thought that all 4 victims were related, but they weren't sure how. The police also wondered how a young woman and 3 children, who were all possibly family, could have gone missing and no one reported their disappearances. In 2013, DNA testing was done on the remains. They were able to confirm that the woman was maternally related to the oldest and youngest girls. She was possibly their mother, their aunt, or older sister. The middle child was not related to any of them, but the police thought that the middle girl was still part of the same family. She was possibly a stepchild, or the girl was adopted. But the DNA testing did not lead investigators any closer to figuring out their identities. In 2015, isotope testing was done on the remains. This type of testing can narrow down where someone drank water while they were growing up. The testing revealed that the 3 related victims lived in the same area for most of their lives. They could have lived in an area that stretched from New England to West Virginia, the Midwest, and the West Coast. The third unrelated girl, known as the middle child, lived further north. She may have lived in the Midwest, upstate New York, or northern Maine. So that meant the 3 related victims could have lived in the area where their bodies were found. But the middle child did not grow up in that area. There are different isotopes in hair, and testing on hair can show where someone has recently lived. The test showed that 2 weeks to 3 months before they were killed, all 4 females lived together in the same area. That area was most likely New England, which is where the bodies were found. But once again, the testing did not help reveal the identity of the 4 females. In 2017, a detective in San Bernardino, California, Peter Headley, got in contact with the police in New Hampshire. Headley explained that he was working on a complicated case. In September 2002, a man going by the name Larry Vanner was questioned by the police regarding the disappearance of his partner, 42-year-old Unsolved June. Vanner and June lived in a middle-class neighborhood in Richmond, California. They had met sometime in late 1999. In the summer of 2001, June and Vanner were married in an unofficial ceremony in a backyard. In May 2002, June went missing. She was reported missing in September 2002. But it wasn't her domestic partner who reported her missing, it was one of her friends. Larry Vanner was brought in for questioning and he voluntarily gave his fingerprints. It turned out that the name Larry Vanner was an alias. Based on his fingerprints, he was Curtis Kimball and he had a criminal record. He had been convicted of child abandonment in March 1989. He was sentenced to 3 years of prison. He served about a year and a half and then he was paroled. On the day Kimball was paroled, he left town and he vanished. Since Kimball had violated the terms of his parole, he was still considered a parolee. This allowed the police to search the home he shared with Unsolved June without a warrant. In the basement of the house was a crawl space with a dirt floor. The detectives went into the basement and they found something odd. It was a large pile of cat litter. They looked through the litter and they found the dismembered body of 42-year-old Unsolved June. The medical examiner later determined she had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Based on other evidence found in the basement, like blood splatter, the detectives determined that June had been beaten to death in the basement. She was dismembered and then covered with a kitty litter. Curtis Kimball, aka Larry Vanner, was charged with Unsolved June's murder. In June 2003, Kimball went to trial. On the second day of his trial, he did something very odd. Against the advice of his lawyer, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. One of the detectives who worked on the case, Roxanne Grudhide, thought she knew why Kimball changed his plea. On the first day of the trial, Grudhide had talked to the district attorney and she told him that she was investigating Kimball's past. When Grudhide talked to the district attorney, Kimball was in earshot. Grudhide thought that Kimball pleaded guilty, so she would stop investigating him. If anything, this intensified her curiosity. Grunheim learned that Kimball's first brush with the law was in 1985. At the time, he was using the name Gordon Jensen. He lived and worked in a trailer park in Scotts Valley, California. In June of that year, he left a 5-year-old girl he called Lisa with a couple in the trailer park. Then he simply disappeared. A warrant for his arrest for child abandonment was issued. The girl, Lisa, was put into foster care and she was eventually adopted by a family on the West Coast. 3.5 years later, in November 1988, Kimball was arrested in San Luis Obispo, California. He was driving a car that had been stolen from Preston, Idaho. He told the police that his name was Jerry Mockerman. 5 months later, his fingerprints revealed that he was Gordon Jensen and he was wanted for child abandonment. He pleaded guilty to child abandonment a couple months later in May 1989 and he was sentenced to 3 years of prison. He was released in 1990 on parole and then he fled. 9 years later, using the name Larry Vanner, he started dating Unson June. Less than 3 years later, June was murdered. While Detective Roxanne Grunheim was investigating Kimball, she wondered if the girl he abandoned, Lisa, was really his daughter. It turned out that the Sheriff's Department in San Bernardino, California, had a sample of Lisa's blood. Detective Grunheim got some of the blood and she created a DNA profile. It was then compared to Kimball's DNA. It turned out that they were not related. This revelation only raised more questions. What was Lisa's true identity? Who was her mother? What happened to her mother? When Lisa was handed over to the authorities in 1985, she was only 5, so she didn't know many personal details about herself or the man who claimed to be her father. When she found out that the man who abandoned her wasn't her father, she was 17, and she couldn't remember much about her life before foster care. In December 2010, Curtis Kimball, who also went by the names Larry Vanner, Gordon Jensen, and Jerry Mockerman, died in prison. The cause of death was a combination of pulmonary emphysema, pneumonia, and lung cancer. Before Kimball died, he refused to discuss his past with the authorities. Also, during his 7 years of prison, he didn't get a single phone call and no one visited him. So the police had very little to go on. After the DNA test proved that Kimball wasn't Lisa's father, Detective Peter Headley with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office set to work trying to figure out Lisa's true identity. In 2013, Lisa suggested to Detective Headley that he should input her DNA into an ancestry database like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. He did, and he did not find any immediate relatives of Lisa. Nevertheless, Detective Headley felt like if he identified one of Lisa's relatives, it would be the key to revealing her identity. However, finding relatives based on DNA was way beyond his level of expertise. So he got in contact with genealogist Barbara Ray Ventnor. Throughout 2015 and into 2016, Ray Ventnor and her team worked on Lisa's case. Together, they spent about 10,000 hours working on it. Then, in the summer of 2016, they figured out who she was. Her real name was Dawn Bowden. Dawn Bowden was last seen by her extended family shortly after Thanksgiving 1981. She was just 6 months old. After Thanksgiving, Dawn and her 23-year-old mother, Denise Bowden, went missing. At the time, Denise and Dawn were living in Manchester, New Hampshire. They were living with Denise's boyfriend, a man who went by the name Robert Bob Evans. It turned out that Evans had been arrested in New Hampshire, and there was a record of his fingerprints. By doing a fingerprint analysis, the police determined that Bob Evans was the same man who used the aliases Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jensen, Larry Vanner, and Jerry Mockerman. Since Bob Evans was the earliest known alias, the investigators started referring to him by that name. They also called him the Chameleon. Detective Headley tried to track down Denise Bowden, but no one had seen or heard from her since that Thanksgiving in 1981. Her family had never reported her missing. In January 2017, the police searched the house where Denise, Dawn, and Evans lived in Manchester, New Hampshire. They thought that Denise's body might have been buried in the basement, but they found no trace of her in or around the house. Detective Headley began to wonder if Denise was the woman found in the barrel near Brook State Park. Manchester is about 15 miles from Allenstown, where the barrels were found. Denise was last seen alive in the fall of 1981, and the barrel was found in 1985. Denise was 23 years old when she went missing, and the adult Jane Doe was between the ages of 23 and 32. So Denise's DNA was compared to the bodies in the barrels. It was determined that she was not the adult female, and none of the bodies were related to her. Then they decided to compare the DNA of Bob Evans to the 4 victims. They had his DNA from when he was arrested for the murder of Unson June. Evans was not related to the 3 related females, but it turned out that he was the biological father of the girl known as the middle child. The police concluded that Evans had killed all 4 victims with their bodies in the barrels and then dumped the barrels in the lot beside Brook State Park. The police could even connect Evans to the lot where the barrels were found. The barrels were on a private lot that once had a store on it, but the store had burned down. The man who had owned the property had worked with Evans. They worked on demolishing an old mill building together. The owner of the lot had allowed materials from the building, including barrels, to be dumped on the property. Evans often took loads out to the property to be dumped. The man who owned the lot had also hired Evans to do electrical work in the store before it burned down. While the DNA match revealed who most likely killed the 4 females found in the barrels, it did not reveal their identities other than that the middle child's father was Bob Evans. The investigators were also wondering who exactly was Bob Evans. Was his real identity any of the names he used? Barbara Ray Ventnor and her team then used forensic genealogy to trace Bob Evans' real identity. Ray Ventnor and her team learned that his real name was Terry Peter Rasmussen. It was the first time that forensic genealogy was used to track down the identity of a killer. Investigators on the Golden State Killer case heard about the process and they contacted Ray Ventnor. Ray Ventnor and her team worked on the Golden State Killer case, and because of their work, it led to the arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo in April 2018. That case sparked a revolution in cold case investigations. Dozens of decades-old cases have been solved since Terry Rasmussen was identified with the help of forensic genealogy. After Rasmussen was identified, the police began to investigate his background. Rasmussen was born in Denver, Colorado in December 1943. He went to high school in Arizona. He dropped out of high school in 1961 and he joined the Navy. In the Navy, he was trained as an electrician. He served in the Navy for about 6 years. During that time, he was stationed in different bases along the west coast of the United States. He was also stationed in the Japanese prefecture of Okinawa. In 1968, Rasmussen was living in Hawaii and he got married. The following year, he and his wife relocated to Phoenix, Arizona. Rasmussen and his wife went on to have 4 children together. Rasmussen and his wife split up in 1975. The last time his family saw him was in 1975 or 1976. At the time, his 4 children were living in Payson, Arizona, and he stopped in to visit them. When Rasmussen visited them, he had a woman with him, but no one remembers her identity. The police suspect that this might be the woman whose remains were found in the barrel in 1985. Rasmussen told his family he was living in Inglewood, Texas, in a place called the Casa del Rey Apartments. After that visit, Rasmussen's family never saw him again. It's believed that in 1978, Rasmussen was still living in Texas. There are records that show he was working as an electrician for a construction company called Brown & Root in Houston. In June 1978, he quit working there. It's believed that later that same year, Rasmussen started working on demolishing the Wambach Mills in Manchester, New Hampshire. When he moved to Manchester, he started using the name Bob Evans. In early 1980, he was supposedly living with a woman named Elizabeth Evans. She signed a certified letter that had the same address as Rasmussen's. Also, Rasmussen was arrested twice in early 1980. Once in February for issuing a bad check, and then once again in May for stealing electricity. On both arrest reports, it says that his wife is Elizabeth Evans. But when Rasmussen was arrested in October 1980, his wife is not named on the report. Elizabeth Evans has never been identified, and it's not known if she was a real person. In November 1981, Rasmussen and his girlfriend, Denise Bowden, and her 6-year-old daughter were seen for the last time in Manchester. A few weeks later, in December, Denise's family went to their home and discovered they had packed up and they were gone. Denise's family never heard from her again. 2.5 years later, in March 1984, Rasmussen got a job with an electrical company in Los Alamitos, California. He was using the name Curtis Kimball. It's unclear if Denise was with him or not, but Denise's daughter, Dawn, was in his custody. Rasmussen worked for the company in Los Alamitos until May 1985. That same month, he was arrested for a DUI. In the car with him when he was arrested was a 5-year-old girl he claimed was his daughter, Lisa. Lisa was Denise's daughter, Dawn Bowden. In November of 1985, the first barrel was found in Allenstown. In January 1986, Rasmussen, using the name Gordon Jensen, was working and living at the Holiday Host RV Park in Scotts Valley, California. In June 1986, Rasmussen abandoned Dawn Bowden with a couple living in the trailer park, and he vanished. In November 1988, Rasmussen was arrested in San Luis Obispo, California. He was driving a car that had been stolen from Preston, Idaho. After he was fingerprinted, the police learned that there was a warrant for his arrest for child abandonment. He was arrested, convicted, and he served a year and a half in prison, and then he was released in 1990. On the first day he was paroled, he fled, and where he went is unknown. In June 1998, Rasmussen was pulled over while driving a car in California. He told the officer that his name was Larry Vanner. He did not have a driver's license or insurance. In 1999, Rasmussen started dating Unsolved June. The next year, in May 2000, the second barrel was found in Allenstown. In June 2002, Unsolved June disappeared. Her body was found in the basement of the home that she shared with Rasmussen in September 2002. In March 2003, Rasmussen pleaded guilty to her murder, and he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He then died in prison in September 2010 at the age of 67. Obviously, there were a lot of holes when it came to investigating Rasmussen's background. Also, the investigation into his background failed to identify the 4 bodies in the barrels. In October 2018, New Hampshire's public radio started releasing a podcast about the case, aptly titled Bear Brook. One person who listened to the podcast was a professional librarian researcher named Rebecca Heath. Heath, who lived in Simsbury, Connecticut, had known about the case for about 10 years. While she was listening to the podcast, she remembered a series of postings made on Ancestry.com that she came across about a year earlier. The postings were in a forum for people who had lost contact with friends and family. The original posting was made in February 2000, and there were several responses. They were all looking for a mother and her 2 daughters. The mother's name was Marylise Elizabeth Honeychurch, and her daughters were Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters. The 2 girls had different fathers. On a hunch, Heath contacted the person who made the original posting. The person who made the posting was looking for her half-sister, Sarah McWaters. She told Heath that before Sarah and her mother, Marylise, went missing, Marylise had married a man with the last name Rasmussen. Heath then got in contact with Marylise's siblings. The last time anyone saw Marylise was in November 1978. At the time, Marylise was 24 years old. Marylise and her 2 daughters, 2-year-old Marie and 11-month-old Sarah, had attended a family Thanksgiving celebration in La Puente, California. Marylise's new boyfriend was with them. Marylise's siblings were sure that the boyfriend's name was Terry. A few days after contacting the person who made the original posting, Rebecca Heath got in touch with Detective Peter Headley and told him what she had found out. Barbara Ray Ventnor had also been working on trying to identify the victims. The problem was that because of the state of the remains, they were unable to get a DNA profile from any of the victims that could have been uploaded to the DNA database GEDmatch. Then Ray Ventnor read about a technique that could get DNA from rootless hair. This had previously been impossible. The technique was developed by Ed Green, a paleogeneticist at the University of California, Santa Cruz. For months, Ray Ventnor and Green worked to build a DNA profile of the victims. The same week that Ray Ventnor got a profile and uploaded it to GEDmatch, the tip from Heath was passed along to her. When Ray Ventnor got the tip from Heath, she had not even looked at the results she got from uploading the DNA profiles. When Ray Ventnor reviewed the results, she confirmed that one of the girls was the half-sister of the woman who made the original posting. the mystery of the identities of the 3 bodies had finally been solved. On June 6, 2019, the police announced that the bodies were Mary Elise Elizabeth Honeychurch and her daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters. However, the identity of the 4th female, known as the middle child, remains a mystery. All that is known is that she is Rasmussen's biological daughter. Many people suspect that the girl's mother is another one of Rasmussen's victims. If you include the middle girl's mother, it brings Rasmussen's presumed body count to 7. It is suspected that Rasmussen killed even more people. For example, after Rasmussen abandoned Dawn Bowden, also known as Lisa, the police asked her if she had any siblings. She said that she did have siblings, but they had died after eating grass mushrooms on a camping trip. Also, several young women who have lived near Rasmussen have vanished. On March 22, 1980, 15-year-old Rachel Garden left her parents' home on foot. Rachel lived in Newton, New Hampshire, which is about 35 miles from Manchester, where Rasmussen was residing. Rachel stopped in at a nearby store, and she was planning on going to her friend's home. But she vanished after she left the store. She has not been seen or heard from since. A month later, on the night of April 27, 1980, 14-year-old Laureen Ron disappeared from her apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire. That night, she had a friend over while her mother was on a date. Laureen either slipped out of the apartment or she was kidnapped from the apartment after her friend fell asleep. Laureen was never seen again. At the time of Laureen's disappearance, Rasmussen was living just 2 blocks from her apartment building. About a month and a half later, at around 1:30 a.m. on June 8, 1980, 25-year-old Denise Ann Denault left a social club in Manchester. She was walking home alone. She never made it there, and she was never seen again. Denault lived 2 blocks away from Laureen. Her neighbor, who lived a few doors away, was Terry Rasmussen. The remains of the 3 young women have never been found. As of right now, there is only speculation that Rasmussen was involved in their disappearances, and there is no physical evidence that he killed them. The police do not have complete records of where Terry Rasmussen lived throughout the years. There are several years where his whereabouts are mysteries. He also used a variety of aliases, so he may have committed other murders during these times. In June 2019, the police released 2 photographs of Marie Vaughn's 7th or 8th birthday party. Marie is the girl in the white dress. It is thought that the photos were taken in 1978 or 1979. The police are not sure where the party was held. They are hoping that someone will be able to shed some light on the location where the photographs were taken. The police are also hoping that someone can identify some of the children in the picture. The only child who's been identified is Marie Vaughn. The police think that one of the children may be the unidentified middle child. In February 2020, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children released a new rendering of the middle child's face. It is believed she was about 2 to 4 years old, so it's thought that she was born between 1975 and 1977. She was white, but she has some Asian, African, and Native American ancestry. She was about 3'3" to 3'9". She had light brown hair that was slightly wavy. Finally, she may have had a noticeable overbite and a gap between her front teeth. The police and the people who have been following the Bear Brook case are hoping she'll be identified soon so that another chapter on the case can be closed. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you're looking for some new videos to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, and see if you can solve the mysteries in the videos. If you like riddles, puzzles, or escape rooms, Chapter Dark will be right up your alley. A link to Chapter Dark should appear on the screen momentarily, and you can also find a link in the description box below this video. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a thumbs up. Please also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Roku. The links are in the description box. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching, and please stay safe.